Father, please put an end to this. I shouted in frustration and fear. Clear in my tone. He continued without pause. Instead of becoming more violent. Dad. Why are you doing this to me? My voice was choked. Weak. And shaky. As if I didn't even recognize it. My name is Arya. And today I will share a story that will forever haunt me. It began as a long nightmare. Slowly growing over time. And I was left wondering when I could escape. What started quietly soon revealed itself as a dark spiral with no way out. It all began when my husband and I were still living with my father-in-law in the large house I once believed would be our home. My husband's name is Ethan. A kind and thoughtful man who loved me deeply. For 3 years. I believed I was the luckiest woman alive. Our marriage appeared flawless. Ethan consistently provided me with a sense of safety. I could always rely on him. We lived in his family's spacious home alongside my father-in-law. And everything appeared to be flourishing, from his career to his family life. As a free-spirited individual who cherishes independence and embraces new experiences, I had a lively existence before marriage. However, since meeting Ethan, I find myself ready to embark on a new chapter of my life. My father-in-law, Victor, has endured significant hardships. Particularly the tragic loss of his wife when Ethan was just a child. She passed away in a devastating car accident. Since then, Victor embraced the role of a single father, taking on the dual responsibilities of nurturing John, which forged a tough exterior for him in the eyes of the world. Yet, beneath that strength lay a deep well of pain and loneliness that remained unaddressed. Our family resided in a tranquil village, distant from the bustle of town, where the atmosphere was serene and breezy. Our home, perched on a small hill, encircled by fields and a scattering of houses, offered fresh and peaceful air. However, there were moments when loneliness crept in, particularly during Ethan's business trips. During our early trips as a married couple, my husband and I shared a deep affection for one another. We were enveloped in a profound love, unafraid to express our affection even with Victor in the house. Ethan was a warm and caring husband. And every time he returned home, I felt a sense of closeness and safety in his embrace. Our evenings were often spent together by the fire, sharing intimate moments. I had no qualms about demonstrating my love for Ethan, despite knowing Victor was nearby, sometimes just across the wall. In the beginning of our marriage, I felt a wave of embarrassment and shyness around my father-in-law. His serious demeanor and calm presence made me instinctively keep my distance and act with decorum. Victor's authoritative air added to my discomfort. And I admit that during those initial months, I was always cautious with my words and actions in his presence. However, as time passed, that shyness began to dissipate. I grew accustomed to his presence in our home and gradually lost my sense of unease. Victor was consistently polite and considerate, which helped ease my initial apprehension. At times, his extreme friendliness brought me comfort. We began to converse more openly, no longer maintaining the distance we had in the early days. As I mentioned, I am a liberal woman, and that aspect of my identity remained unchanged even after marriage. I have always exuded confidence. I embrace my physique and prefer to wear attire that enhances my allure. Fitted dresses and snug t-shirts are consistently my selections. I maintain that style even when I'm at home, as it brings me comfort and confidence. Initially, I experienced a hint of shyness while donning tight clothes in Victor's presence. But over time, that shyness faded away. I believed I was the one married to Ethan. There is no reason to conceal anything or feel embarrassed. There are evenings when Ethan and I sit together in the living room, chatting or simply enjoying each other's company. I find nothing unusual about Victor's presence. He seems like a good father-in-law who has faced many losses and now just wants to see his son and daughter-in-law happy. My closeness with Ethan doesn't embarrass me when he's around because I believe such intimacy is normal in a family. However, as time goes on, I sense a shift that I didn't anticipate. Initially, when I wore fitted clothes or sat close to Ethan, Victor's glances would make me uneasy. But over time, I began to notice that those looks felt less accidental. I recall a moment when Ethan was away on a business trip. I found myself at home, alone with Victor. That night I wore a comfortable but somewhat sexy nightgown the way I usually wear at home. When I walked into the kitchen to get some water, I caught Victor's eyes looking straight at me, a gaze that was not that of a father-in-law looking at his daughter-in-law. It felt like an electric current ran through me. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that I was thinking too much. But that gaze remained in my mind like an unpleasant sign that I could not forget. It was hard to describe. But his gaze became clearer and clearer. It was not admiration or concern as I had thought, but curiosity, a somewhat invasive gaze. Victor's gazes began to become more ominous. From fleeting glances to fixed stares that I could not ignore, he began to act more and more confusingly. His intimate gestures going beyond the limits of what I had thought was a normal relationship between a father-in-law and daughter-in-law. At first I told myself that maybe I was overthinking it, that Victor was just trying to help me with the housework. However, as time passed, I increasingly recognized that something was amiss. Victor consistently displayed a willingness to assist. Initially, his assistance felt genuine. But over time, it shifted to something less altruistic. He would show up whenever I was hanging the clothes, his gaze tracking my every action. It was evident that there were moments when he arrived with a smile, masking his true intentions, and said he would help me hang the clothes. At that time I did not refuse, thinking that he simply wanted to help me with the work. However, I began to notice that his actions were no longer normal. Help. One time when I was hanging the clothes, Victor accidentally touched my hand. At first I ignored it, but after a few similar times the intentionality became too obvious. Every time he touched my hand there was a slight hesitation, as if he wanted to prolong that moment. I was startled and pulled my hand back. But Victor kept smiling, not seeming embarrassed or feeling wrong. Whenever it rained, Victor would quickly go out to the yard to help me collect the clothes. But what started to worry me was that he didn't hesitate to touch sensitive items. Instead of doing it discreetly like a normal father-in-law would do, he picked them up naturally, even folded them neatly and put them in the laundry basket as if nothing unusual happened. His gesture made me shiver, but I dared not say it out loud, afraid that I was overthinking it. I remember clearly one time when it started to rain heavily. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch. Looking out the window, I saw Victor rushing out to the yard to collect the clothes. I initially felt grateful for his help during my busy moments. However, I froze when I saw him pick up my underwear without a second thought. He glanced at them and placed them in the basket with a slight smile, and that sight made me uncomfortable. Victor's assistance had gone too far. The intimacy in his actions became more evident. Anxiety crept in whenever I found myself alone with him. What terrified me even more was my uncertainty about how to confide in John. I feared he wouldn't believe me or, worse, think I was overreacting. I remained silent, but my heart grew heavier with unease and panic about what was unfolding in a home that should have felt safe. For me, there was a day that remains etched in my memory, a day that changed everything. It began like any other ordinary day. Ethan, my husband, left for work early, leaving just me and my father-in-law, Mr. Victor, at home, as was customary. After Ethan departed, Victor would head out to work in the fields. In the early hours, I found solace in my routine, a sense of security enveloping me as the house lay quiet and empty, just me within its walls. A wave of freedom and comfort washed over the space, knowing I had the entire morning to unwind. That particular day, I chose to sink into the embrace of the sofa for some much-needed rest. in the living room where my father-in-law typically settles in for his evening TV time. Assuming he had gone to the fields and that the house was empty, I absent-mindedly slipped into a cool outfit, slightly more revealing than usual. It was merely a habit of mine. Confident in my body and unbothered by the notion of comfortable attire at home, I settled into the chair, allowing my body to relax fully. As I drifted into a deep sleep, the chair's softness and the house's tranquility enveloped me, leaving me defenseless in that serene space. It was so quiet that I slipped into slumber, unaware that everything was about to shift in an instant. It all began when my father-in-law, whom I believed was occupied in the fields, unexpectedly returned home earlier than usual. Perhaps he completed his tasks ahead of schedule. Or perhaps he concocted a reason to return. But the unsettling part was my total oblivion to his arrival. He slipped into the house without uttering a word. Without making a sound, his footsteps were so quiet that in my deep slumber, I remained oblivious to Victor standing there, his eyes fixed on me. I was unaware of his stare, unable to grasp that something was profoundly amiss. I lay there innocently in my revealing clothes, completely unaware that I was the object of his gaze in the next few seconds. His gaze seemed to change, and that was the beginning of a chain of events that I will never forget. At that moment I was still sleeping soundly, completely oblivious to his presence, a presence that would lead to horrors that I could not foresee. He stood there looking at me for a long time, his gaze unreadable and complex. I could not tell whether the thoughts in his head had existed before or had just exploded. In that moment, a man who had been a widower for many years, lonely in his own home, now stood before a young woman as vibrant and attractive as me. Perhaps he could no longer suppress his instincts. I lay there defenseless, carefree in my comfortable clothes, unaware that I was the target of a lustful gaze. Without warning, he suddenly pounced his whole body and rushed towards me. And before I could react, he had me in his arms were wrapped tightly around me as if he were determined no longer suppress his instincts. I lay there defenseless, carefree in my comfortable clothes, unaware that I was the target of a lustful gaze. Without warning, he suddenly pounced his whole body and rushed towards me, and before I could react, he had me in his arms were wrapped tightly around me as if he were determined not to let me go. His movements were so fast, so strong that I felt as if I was being strangled. I could hardly believe what was happening. A feeling of dread washed over me, and I tried to struggle, but his strength was overwhelming. Dad. What are you doing? I screamed, panic rising within me. Yet he remained silent. Instead of halting, he continued, his greedy hands roaming over my body. I felt each possessive touch as every contour of my form was thoroughly explored. Shame faded away as fear and panic took hold. I struggled against him, summoning every ounce of strength to push him away. Yet my body betrayed me with its weakness. He was powerful and muscular, rendering all my efforts futile. I was trapped in his relentless hold. Dad, stop this! I shouted in fury. Panic was palpable in my voice. Yet he continued unabated. Instead of becoming more violent, tears welled up in my eyes. Fear and humiliation overwhelmed me, and my heart shattered at the painful betrayal. I couldn't believe that the person I once trusted could do this. The pain in my heart mixed with fear, leaving me feeling completely helpless and trapped. Trapped in a nightmare with no escape. My father-in-law seemed indifferent to everything around him. He ignored my pleas and dismissed my resistance. Just give me one more chance. Son's voice echoed softly, almost like a desperate plea. The sound filled me with fear and revulsion. My heart felt as if it were shattering. Yet, how could I come to terms with this? How could I accept something that was never meant to be? I exerted every ounce of effort to break free from his grip. Yet my efforts proved ineffective. His strength was overwhelming. and his determination appeared to be veiled in obscurity. I was drained. My resistance waning and futile after the horrific act my father-in-law had committed. He rose as if freed from a weight, uttering words that would forever linger in my mind. "I'm sorry." The apology reverberated in the stillness around us. Space enveloped me. Yet it felt weightless in the face of his actions. How could an apology possibly undo the harm he had inflicted? How could mere words alter this harsh reality? I remained there, silent, tears streaming endlessly, my body shaking with the humiliation and agony of ultimate betrayal. No words remained, only tears. How could I ever find it in myself to forgive him? What steps can I take to keep moving forward in life? In this house, where everything lay in ruins. Those questions reverberated in my mind. A haunting reminder that nothing would ever be the same again. "Dad, why did you do this to me?" My voice faltered, weak and trembling, as if it belonged to someone else. The question lingered in the air, heavy with despair and horror. I couldn't fathom that the man I once held in such high regard could inflict this pain upon me. After that, I sat and wept throughout the day, tears cascading silently, unending. The torment of pain and humiliation was relentless. And I found myself waiting for Ethan to return. Returning from work. My thoughts were a chaotic storm, leaving me uncertain of how to begin. When he arrived home, I could no longer contain the weight of my experience. It was too dreadful to conceal. I recounted everything, every excruciating detail, my voice breaking under the weight of my tears. John stood there, momentarily speechless, his eyes reflecting shock and disbelief. Each word I uttered cut through the silence like a blade. Anger surged, piercing through the depths of his heart. His eyes glistened, a blend of anguish and disillusionment. He rose and approached Victor, grappling with a reality he struggled to embrace. "Dad, why did you do this? What actions did you take regarding Ethan's?" His voice trembled, as if every word was an unbearable burden. Victor stood there, head bowed, saying nothing. And that only intensified Ethan's anxiety. He was his father's son. And despite the anger coursing through him, he remained tethered by family ties. How could he confront this situation? The painful reality was that the father he had always held in high regard had shattered everything he believed in, leaving John to turn away, no longer able to reconcile his feelings. Daring to look at Victor, he grappled with the truth he couldn't accept yet felt compelled to confront. "You destroyed everything I believed in," his voice trailed off, crushed by deep disappointment. Jan fell silent that night. I could see the struggle in his eyes. A battle between loyalty to his family and love for me. He sat quietly, staring into space as if searching for answers to the unexplainable. He couldn't forgive Victor. Yet severing ties with his father felt impossible, leaving him emotionally adrift. The next morning, we made the decision to leave this house. He quietly gathered his belongings, not casting a glance back at the house. However, I deeply comprehended that this departure signified more than just leaving a physical space. It symbolized the loss of a part of himself. "I'm sorry," Arya whispered. Yet I found myself powerless against the gravity of his voice, laden with the burdens of both the past and future. His steps were deliberate and labored, each one a testament to an inner struggle. With my heart weighed down, I turned my gaze toward Jan, knowing that we were both trapped in this pain with no way out. How could we continue to live together knowing that the shadow of this horror always hung over our family that night? After everything was revealed, we sat in silence. Neither of us said a word but in John's eyes I saw the pain, the disappointment and the helplessness. I couldn't stay in this place another minute, and Ethan, though confused, Knew that we had to leave this house once the place where we thought we would build a happy life now held only pain and indelible betrayal. We packed up that night. Taking only the essentials. Each step out of that house was like brushing aside a memory that I didn't want to remember anymore. Ethan didn't say much. But I knew he was also deeply wounded by his father's betrayal. The night enveloped us as we left the house. The distant streetlights illuminating the path ahead. Not a word of goodbye. Not a single glance back. From that moment on I knew we would never return to that place again. The house that had once been our home was now just a forgotten memory. A place filled with pain that we could no longer touch. After leaving my father-in-law's house we started a new life in a completely different place, far away from the painful past. Ethan. Although it was very difficult choice to face the truth about his father, he did not go back to confront Victor after that night. And we both accepted that going back would only make things more complicated and painful. We built a life away from the house that held so much hurt. Victor stayed there. And we did not stay connected. It was a decision we both reached. Though Ethan still bore the scars of his father's betrayal from that harrowing event. I learned that not all family ties can sustain trust and love indefinitely. Sometimes we must release those bonds to shield ourselves from deeper anguish. Confronting the truth and opting to walk away is not a sign of weakness, but rather the only path to preserving self-respect and mental security. Through this journey, I also came to understand that true love transcends mere presence. It encompasses the strength to surmount the greatest obstacles, to safeguard one another. Ethan and I chose to shield our lives from toxicity. Even if it meant distancing ourselves from those we once held dear. Our lives have found stability since then. Yet the wounds in our hearts remain. Ethan still occasionally brings up his father during the most painful moments. As if he struggles to fully let go. Will he find it in himself to forgive Victor in time? Or will he remain tethered to that hurt? Today, I confront a past shrouded in uncertainty. My only wish is for us to forge a future unburdened by those memories. While the process of forgiveness or forgetting is a personal journey for each of us, the ultimate resolution remains elusive. Yet, I hold on to the belief that we made the right choice. Selecting the path that safeguards one another.